Welcome to the business end. Today we're joined by someone who led England women's rugby through one of its most dominant periods and did it inside a system that offered almost none of the resources or visibility the men's game took for granted. Catherine Spencer earned 63 caps as a number 8 between 2004 and 2011. She captained England for 3 seasons, led them to six Nations titles, including 5 Grand Slams, and took the team to 2 World Cups. The second on home soil in 2010, where they lost the final to New Zealand by 3 points. She was England Player of the Year, won the Rugby Union Writers Club Award, and earned her nickname the Polar Bear for the way she physically shut down driving mauls. But her career sat inside a system where players paid for their own travel, trained around full-time jobs, and operated without contracts. Since retiring, she's founded Inspiring Women, worked in media with Sky Sports, BBC and ITV, written a memoir, and more recently moved into teaching, bringing what she learned about leadership under pressure into a completely different environment. Catherine, welcome to the business end.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us, Catherine. Let's
Thank you.
crack on and get into it. So you captain England, an England side that won Grand Slams consistently at a period of time when the players were unpaid, self-funded, training around their day jobs. When you walked into that environment as a captain, what were the actual daily standards that held performance together? And which of those standards were never written down? They were just culturally ingrained.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, our standards was very similar to every other kind of sports team and rugby team in terms of kind of individual performance and team performance. We all had our kind of KPIs, if you want to call them that, in terms of, what we were lifting the gym, how many line-outs we were in on the pitch. That was no different. The fact that we weren't paid didn't make a jot of difference to that. So probably for us, it probably was more of the unseen stuff that helped us keep it performing as a team. Because as you say, we were all working. There were some students that weren't doing that much, but we were all working. We had, most of us full-time jobs. So our time together as team or in training groups was not as much. So often we were out training on our own. Our performance relied on probably individual resilience, if you like. And that's what we kind of thrived on in a way. So we had this mantra, when no one is watching. So when we were training on our own, that's when we lifted our performance. That's when we pushed a bit more weight. That's when we ran a bit faster. And that was something that went through the whole team, really. I remember there was one time I was training in just a normal change in Bristol with normal members of the public and me, and I was having to do this sprint interval session on the treadmill, which was horrific because obviously it was running. I remember just repeating to myself, I looked like a madwoman, bright red, sweat flying everywhere, going, when no one is watching, because I just wanted to give up, but I couldn't because I knew my teammates were doing it, or I knew, my opposition somewhere in the world was training hard. So it was, for us, it was those unseen things, those unwritten things that kind of led us to work so hard around our jobs and get up at 5 a.m. or whatever it might have been to go training before go to work.
Great, and really turning a negative into a positive there, and helping drive you individually and collectively.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So going on to the 2010 World Cup when you played New Zealand and the result, what in terms of pressure, like where did that who was taking all the pressure of that game? Where did it land in the group? And what do you think? Who absorbed all the pressure? Where was it lying with?
Do you mean after the game, before the game,
before the game and the build up to the game?
Yeah, I think definitely after the game, I felt a lot of that myself, I think. And actually, funny enough, that was something that the leadership team and Streety and Graham Smith looked at between 2010 and 2014 when they did win the World Cup, was to broaden that leadership team. And going into 2010, I wouldn't have said there was a leadership team. I was captain. Katie McLean, who played fly half, obviously a leadership position on the pitch, kind of took on that vice captain role. But other than that, that was it. That was kind of the leadership. So that's definitely something they changed. I think they were conscious that I did take a lot on my shoulders. And maybe ultimately that lack of wider leadership meant that we didn't win the game and that we should have made different decisions, or I should have made different decisions. But we were in a good place leading into the 2010 World Cup. We'd come off the back of a really, really strong 2009, or second half of 2009. We were feeling really confident. We went into that World Cup knowing we were going to win, or we didn't. So I feel like any pressure we had before the game it felt spot on at the time. It felt like fuel. Felt like fuel, really, rather than pressure before the game that we were going to use. Probably for me, post game, I felt more pressure than I ever had done. And I don't think I dealt with it that well. I can look back on it now, right at the end of the game, I wanted to be with my teammates, but I was over at the edge of the pitch doing an interview with TV, which was possibly one of the hardest interviews I've ever done in my life. And then, I was with my teammates for a little bit, and then they could go off and be with each other. I had to go to the press conference, which was, again, like, it was great. There were so many cameras in the room. It was great that the game developed, but right at that moment, I didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And then eventually I just wanted to see my family. Eventually I remember going in at the finals at the Steep and Harlequins, and they were in the end of the big long bar there. And I just wanted to get to my family, and all these people just kept coming and talking to me. And I was swimming against treacle, just trying to be with the people I wanted to be there. And then, after that, I couldn't go home still. I had to do a piece for Sky, who had been a great followers of us. It was really important to do that, and I had to sit and read all the headlines in the papers about how we'd lost the game, which was really hard. And then eventually I went home. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to see anyone, because there was this weird conflict going on. There was kind of me. I was like, we've just lost. I couldn't see beyond that. And then there were other people go, well done, you got a silver medal. Like, isn't that great? The game's really grown. And I was like, oh, we just lost. And, I felt a lot of the responsibility about on my shoulders. I streeted it as well, Gary Street, and I found that really, really difficult. And then I've never watched the game back. I never could. And I think partly, when I reflect on it now and you've had time, I retired the following year. And I think, I said I wanted to retire on my own times, but I think really I knew that I struggled with that kind of high performance reflection at that point, because I didn't want to. I didn't want to watch the game. I didn't want to see where it didn't go right. And I'm like, I can't go on to the next World Cup if I'm feeling like that in a way. And that's only something I've really kind of addressed recently. And I've still never watched it. I still never watched the final, and I probably never will. But yeah, I felt a lot of the pressure. But as a collective, as an England squad, as an England team, and England management, that was something they looked at particularly, the broadening the leadership team, which ultimately was the right decision.
So before the game, so two questions before the game: how did you deal with the pressure? And the second question is, obviously, because you were absorbing the pressure, did you think that led to, after the game, almost like a bit of a burnout, because you've been running up and down treadmills and doing a lot and taking it all on board? And then I suppose the third point is, then there was a smart decision that they saw that to spread the load across a wider leadership team, and there's a lesson there for business.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge. It doesn't make that one leader, a lesser leader. It just means that you're bringing, you're making something strong even stronger. And that's what was required. For us, 2006 to 2010 was a massive shift in terms of the profile that we were getting. I mean, and then again, another massive shift, and the World Cup just gone. But in 2006, we played our World Cup in Canada. You wouldn't have known. You had to look, through a magnifying glass to find the coverage. It was on Sky. Sky were televising. They were fantastic supportive as well, at the time. But even out in Canada, where we played our pool games, you could drive past, you wouldn't have known a World Cup was going on. It was, it was unbelievable. And then the shift then from then to 2010, and the coverage that we were getting, we loved it. Every kind of venue we went to, we had all the newspaper clippings on the wall. We were enjoying that. We were kind of thriving on it. And it was all positive, because the people that were reporting on us wanted to, and they were kind of doing it because they wanted to support the game. So we didn't really have any kind of negative press or anything at that point, and we were doing well. We were kind of favourites to win, really. And then obviously we didn't. But it was I would say it was, it was all good pressure leading into the World Cup. That's what it felt like.
Yeah. And who made the actual decision to spread the leadership group and the pressure? Who called that one?
Yes, that was Gary Street and Graham Smith. So Gary Street was head coach, Graham Smith forwards coach. So they carried the team through from
Yeah.
2010 on through to 2014. Graham had been there in 06 as well.
Yeah.
And it was there, I would say, after they did all their reviews that they needed to do after 2010, after that World Cup final, which I wasn't part of, they saw that and addressed that. And, it's something that Streety spoke about afterwards, and
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
too much kind of responsibility on one leader. And, probably at the time I would have been like, no, it's fine, I can do it. It's all right. And actually, with reflection, no, it was too much. Of course, it was too much.
Yeah. That's a smart move that by the coach to do that. It's very good.
Yeah, it was. And that's what takes a good leader, isn't it? Is to look at, that was very much their kind of setup, wasn't it, in 2010? They put that kind of system in place, and to be that reflective and go, actually, do you know what? That's not working. We need
Yeah.
to change that and do that. It shows strengths, doesn't it, to be able to look inwards on your own decisions and then, adapt that, look objectively and make a change, because they were really emotionally invested as well. They're human beings like us, the players. They were gutted we didn't win in 2010. But, they had the strength to take it forward and think, right, this is what we've got to change.
Yeah. They
And
spotted the red flags before anything started to capitulate, basically.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and again, as you've mentioned there, I mean, the profile was lifting in the run up to that 2010 World Cup. I mean, there was some great press being out there, and you were winning a lot. You really were, were leading the charges in women's rugby. In women's rugby, you were. It was great success. That England squad was having some really world-class players coming through. So hard to spot or address that in the run-up to it. And again, 3-point difference in a final. So great work afterwards to really unpack that and the system and push it on. So you've spoken about leading by example rather than volume in a squad environment where you're captain and everyone's balancing rugby careers with personal lives. How did the group, how did the coaches actually hold people to account and keep those standards rising?
Yeah, everyone, I mean, to start with, everyone wanted to get selected. That's why you play for your country, I feel. Like, I've actually sort of, put it in my book. I've kind of spoken about it before. I find it uncomfortable that people are paid to play for their country. I think, that's like the money at the end of the month is an external motivator for me, and it's not as valuable or effective as intrinsic motivation, which is what we all had. And it's more, it's long term. So, we held players to account because at the end of the day, we wanted to be selected. We wanted to be in that first 15 until they invented finishers or whatever and gave them some value, which they do have. We wanted to be selected. That was the first thing. And then, but for us, we were very much about the team performance. We wanted England to win. As you say, we had a winning culture. We won a lot. To look at the percentages, and at that time, it's very, very good. Many teams would want that. We wanted our team to perform as a whole, and lastly, for everyone in that setup, we wanted to grow the game. So that was a big motivator for us. We were aware really that we needed to show a good product on the pitch. That was in our control as players, not everything else was, but we knew if we went out there and played really well and tackled really well, and we were athletes and we were working on our own training away from the pitch, we were doing our bit to show what a great product it was, and then it was up to other people to do stuff around that. So, really, we were held to account by those three things that were driving us. We wanted to get selected as individuals. We wanted the team to perform, but we were also aware of playing our part in growing the game, which was really, really important to us. It's what we loved, and we wanted to show that to everyone else. So they were the three things that drove us. There wasn't anything else. I don't think that was necessarily required. What's a greater draw than playing for your country? You're going to work hard for that.
Yeah,
for sure.
System self-regulating. You select yourself out, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
without a doubt. Yeah. And, if people, as you say, people had lives, families, work, things go up and down in people's lives, and sometimes that does affect performance. You can't be at the top of your game all the time. And, those conversations would be had with players, wouldn't it? Or like if they were kind of dropped out of selection for a while, damn hard they're going to work back to get back in it. There was nothing else that was required, was it? And that kind of motivation to be back in the team. And that's part of it, isn't it? Half of it's physical. You've got to be able to be as strong or as fast as you need to be in your position. But that's only half of it, isn't it? Half of it is the kind of the mental strength to keep working and to keep working hard and to, you know, be organised in your life, to devote the time to, to get up, to go training, to kind of to suffer the setbacks, but bounce back from that. And that the other half of it, and you haven't got that, you could be the finest physical specimen in the world. You're not going to play for your country.
For sure.
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to
Yeah.
say, it seemed from the outside looking in that you had a great depth chart of talent in the squad, in the rider squad. Did you feel that you had that pressure on as captain and as a player that you needed to really push on your individual performance each and every time, whether it's match day or in the gym or on the training park, to make sure that you were staying ahead of your competition? Did you feel that heat behind you?
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. It kind of changes when you become captain. So, before that, when I first got into the England setup, I was playing for my home club, Folkestone. I didn't play in the Premiership. I was a little bit stubborn. I'm like, I'm going to stay where I are. I love playing for my club. We were kind of, we got up to like kind of level 2, level 3. We'd done well. I felt I was still learning. I went to Premiership for half season, then went back to Folkestone because that's where I felt I was playing better. But, breaking into the England setup, like no one really knew me. Or like, who is this girl from Folkestone? And I found that I didn't feel confident to start with. I was developing my confidence as I went. And I was like, oh, actually, maybe I can do this. Maybe, I'm okay. And then similar when I became captain, I wouldn't say that I was the natural choice. Streety had a long list of criteria and I managed to come out on top of that. I also at one point phoned him when I knew Sue Day was the outward going captain. I knew there was kind of a vacancy. I feel like it's the bravest I've ever been in my life. And I phoned him up and I said, I want to be captain. I had a real think about it. I sort of developed this sort of quiet leadership style. And I put my hand up and I was really, really nervous. I've known Streety for years. He'd been there right since the beginning of academy. I remember now I sat in a car park on my lunch break. I used to work at Yates Leisure Centre for the Glamour. And I phoned him and I actually ended up chatting about other players, including Rocky, Tamara Taylor, who would be good captains. And I was like, hang on, I was supposed to talk about myself. But I think that was something that went in my favour, that I had phoned him up. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, when I became captain, I wasn't necessarily the most natural choice, but you are right. So I had to kind of develop my captaincy. I was absolutely winging it for a couple of years. I was faking it until I worked out what I was doing. And then I realised I was, I'm actually doing this now. That's okay. But you have to, there's even more of a spotlight you on a player as a player. Players who were playing my position who wanted to play number 8 for England were like, well, she's just getting picked, she's captain. So you have to definitely up your performance. I wanted to be on that pitch because I was the best number 8, not because I was captain. And you suddenly have these 2 jobs that you've got that are really important, and you've got to perform and excel at both of those. Otherwise it won't work. You still got to do your day job as your number 8 or your position on a pitch, plus suddenly have this other seemingly full-time job and then have an actual job as well for me. But yeah, I think you're right. When you become captain, there's a bigger spotlight. You're expecting to talk about leading by example on the pitch. You're expected to, aren't you? And often in the big moments when it counts, you've got to keep your composure, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
And you equally have to, I feel like, train harder, work harder, because you've always got a point to prove. You've got to be even better to say that you're there on merit, not because you've got that C after your name on the team list.
Yeah, good point.
Just taking you back, Catherine, when you talked about, I found out fascinated about the contracts and said it made no difference to performance. I can remember watching an interview with David Campese. I think it was like late 80s, and
Yeah.
he was doing grid sprints during his lunchtime, and they said, do you want to be a professional athlete? And he said, I am a professional athlete. And he said the definition of professionalism was for him to be an expert at what he does, to be the best possible person, and that's not judged on how well you're paid. And that translates into the business world, to be a true professional, you just got to want to be the best, and material things follow, and like the game going professional helps you become better, but like money doesn't really come into it.
No.
I mean, yeah, would you agree with that? And yeah,
I completely 100% agree. We always considered ourselves as professional, and we always said, with a little p, we consider ourselves have a professional mindset. And I remember actually one year we played over in France in the Six Nations, and when I first came into the setup, they were the best team in Europe. I lost them in 2004 in the Six Nations and 2005 in the Six Nations. And then I can't remember what year it was, 6, 7 or 8. I can't remember. We went over to France and we beat them pretty well. And I remember, it must have been like, anyway, on the loud, on the tannoy at the end, the PA at the end after the game, they actually said, like, well done, France, you played well considering you were playing against a professional team. And we were like, the players, in players, we're not getting paid while they say, I was like, isn't this brilliant? Isn't this brilliant that they think that? That is just a great thing, But we were never paid. We considered ourselves professional in our outlook, and, we made decisions to just always keep that performance. And if that meant going and doing sprints in your lunch break or getting up early. I remember one year I used to train with Sophie Henning. We lived near each other in Bristol. And I'd gone to speak at an event in a rugby club in Birmingham on the Friday night, I think it was. And, had a nice, like hotel room that was lovely. And Sophie, she worked as a vet, incredible human being, like absolutely incredible, a full-time vet. And her shift started at like 7 a.m. We had this sprint session we had to do. So I remember setting my alarm and leaving Birmingham at like 4 a.m. so that I could get back and do my sprint session with Sophie before she started training. And that's those. I didn't question it. That's just what I did. Like I hated mornings. I'm not a morning person. Remember Graham Smith always said to me, just move one leg. That's all you need to do. Just move one leg. And that's all I ever thought about in the mornings. Just move one leg. But yeah, I would, I had all day free after that, but it was important to me to go and do that training with Sophie. And same with companies. I don't think I would want to be a professional athlete. I'm not saying, if I was 20 years younger, I wouldn't turn it away. I wouldn't send the money back, but I loved playing when I did. And I feel, real credibility when I go and speak to people if I'm doing talks or something and say, we were ordinary people. We just did something quite extraordinary around that. Like I feel that has a bit of authenticity and a bit more kudos, I think. Like I'm not taking away anyone who's paid to play rugby. Like that's the time that they live in. That's the time they play in. But for me, there was something special about doing what we did around our day jobs.
Yeah.
It's a great way to frame it.
So moving on now to 2009, Captain England, your 50th game against the Black Ferns, and you scored a try. Take us inside the camp, like 48 hours before. Did you ever think that how did you install belief perhaps in some of the players that might have been like, we've never beaten New Zealand? How would you install that sense of confidence in the team?
Yeah, so to put this in context, so as you say, this was 2009. I would just like to add to your list that I did get a player of the game as well. I can't believe you missed that out. But anyway,
sorry, that's Fitzy.
So this was 2009. New Zealand had not lost a game since 2001, and that was to England in 2001. So this is 8 years without, and they didn't play the same amount of games that we did, but they hadn't lost a game since 2001. They seemed pretty invincible. They won the last how many World Cups. They were incredible. For us, the most important thing was the game that we played them the week before the game at Twickenham. We played a game at Isha, and we lost, but we came off that pitch knowing that we could beat them because we hadn't played our best game in that game, and we suddenly understood that they weren't invincible, that this aura everyone thought they had, it could be blown apart. Losing to them, but understanding that we could give more was probably more important than anything else. So we went into that game in 2009 knowing with unshakable belief that we could beat them. And actually so we played, so it was at Twickenham, we played after the men, and there was a delay actually. So we used to go and the men would finish, we'd go and do our warm up on the pitch whilst many of the crowd were leaving the stadium because they had no idea that a women's game was on, but that's another conversation. So we'd go and do our warm up on the pitch, and then kick off, I don't know, an hour after the men's game, something like that. But in this particular game, the referee got injured, or the men's game got injured, or something like that. And so the men's game went on for much longer. And our game was on TV, Sky was showing it, so we had to stick to the schedule. And our warm-up time was getting reduced, more and more reduced, which for me is good because I tended to like to conserve energy in the warm-ups. But anyway, so we had this my favourite warm-up ever. We were kind of in the change room, we had a couple of bikes, we had a couple of rowers, we were all really close together in the changing room. And this belief that we were going to win felt like it was in the air, and we didn't need to say it. It was just this look at each other. We knew we were going to go and do it. And then we went out onto the pitch for probably 10 minutes of this most intense warm-up ever, but absolutely perfect, absolutely spot on. And then we went out and everything just went well. We were just on the same page. Everything kind of clicked. I was just having the time of my life in playing terms. Running off the base of the scrum was my absolute favourite thing to do, other than getting in the middle of them all. And it was just working for us, and you got that try, and it was what a magnet for us, really, because, it set us up nicely for 2010. Didn't win that game, but it kind of spearheaded us onwards. And it was like a massive boost in terms of profile for the game as well. The men had just lost. We came out, we won. We beat New Zealand, the world champions. And, in the context of growing the game, it was quite a key moment, actually. And then we went and all had a good night in the cabbage patch afterwards. That's another podcast as well.
Sounds a good one. What can you say what it was that flicked the switch? So we're going to beat them, and gave you that absolute confidence. Can you point your finger at anything?
I think there were little things that we did on the pitch that just we didn't quite get, that we knew we could. This is a long time ago. It was like 2009, but I just remember thinking that, we could have just done that slightly differently, or we could have done that better, And there were a few little individual things. I think we went into the Isha game, we were a bit nervous, a couple of missed tackles here or there. I think we just held back a little bit because we were like, oh no, we're playing against New Zealand. We can't, we're not supposed to beat them. That doesn't happen. So I think really we were not as up for it as we should have been. And I think we went into the game at Twickenham with a clarity of mind that we didn't have at Isha, because we had that confidence that we got from losing, but knowing we could play better. So I think actually in that Asia game, it was sort of individual sitting back a little bit, a bit like Ireland men against France in their first half, sitting back a little bit. They'd been a bit blown away and they didn't come back, and I think we're a bit like that. We didn't start strongly enough. We kind of gave them more space than we should have done. It just gave us huge confidence, and it gave us this certainty that we could go and beat them. They weren't all that, we'd played 60-70% of our best in the game at Isha, and we knew we had more to give. And so I think it was definitely a kind of a mental approach into Isha, giving them, it sounds a bit boring, a bit too cliched, we gave them too much respect. We gave them a head start before the whistle started, because you're better than us, you're New Zealand. Oh no, we didn't make them earn it on the pitch, really.
Yeah, so you basically had confidence in the systems and the players around you. You knew that basically it was an off day or intimidation of playing them. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, we had it, and actually the difference between the two games, though, New Zealand played a sort of very similar move in the game at Twickenham, and I won't say who. There was a player that missed a tackle in the same move in the week before and absolutely nailed it the week after. Brilliant. Part of that is knowing it, knowing what was coming. Yeah. Part of it was a mindset. It's like, I've got you. It doesn't matter that you're a black fan and you're wearing that famous jersey. game.
Yeah, it's intent, isn't it? Is that the right way of phrasing it? You've got intent to implement what
Yeah,
you're supposed to do rather than being nervous and
yeah.
thinking, yeah, yeah,
Confidence is so important, isn't it? And we can all, wing it to a certain point, but when you get to those upper echelons and those upper levels of high performance, it's got to be real, it's got to be authentic, hasn't it? And it
yeah.
can make a huge impact into the way you approach something.
I can hear words ringing in my head, Fitzy. I can hear Dr. Stephen McIver talk about confidence. He said confidence isn't going to get you off the floor, though.
Yeah.
And it's not going to win you the game. It's actually, what's behind the processes behind it,
Yeah,
and you feel
it's part of the
confident.
puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, you feel confident because you've got systems in place.
Yeah.
So yeah, very very good point.
Well, and I think you get a lot of that confidence. Is interesting listening to you, Catherine, there, and you're talking about that it's not just you
Yeah.
that's putting the work in; it's collectively you're putting the work in. You've got that intrinsic, or you build that intrinsic confidence within yourself, within the group, having a great coaching staff. Having a group of really talented players around you and world-class players. That doesn't hurt either as well. And then once you've broken through that glass ceiling of beating the All Blacks, everything, for that period of time, everything is possible there afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. We always used to talk about the little 1%, the tiny little details, because we knew we were good. We knew you were pretty good, but it was those tiny little 1%, and for us, it was arriving early to meetings, arriving early to training sessions, having the right equipment, like whatever it might have been, those tiny little things that on their own, stand alone, seem they were doing that, seem insignificant. You put them all together and they're hugely powerful. And you're right, for us, we knew we'd put the work in. We look back and we knew we'd done that training or we'd done this, or we'd, our bench score has gone up, our bench press has gone up, our sprints got quicker. We knew that, and that's part of what builds your confidence, isn't it? Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
So you operated at a period where there was great growth within the women's game into the national team. You mentioned going to Canada and it largely being invisible during the World Cup to the public and really underfunded probably by the union, I think is fair to say, but there was a great growth there. So when you were inside of that systems, what conversations were happening to push that growth on? What were people afraid to say? And what was the cost of those conversations not happening?
It's difficult to say now, isn't it? Because there was growth in the game. I think at the time I felt frustrated that perhaps things could have shooted along a little bit quicker. I think there was decisions that were made sometimes at the time that were completely unbelievable to me. So things like that didn't help the growth of the games. When we were looking at like home venues for Six Nations, one year we were England. One year our home ground was London Irish. The next year our home ground was London Welsh. And I have to say, London Irish are great. Sunbury are great, actually. I loved playing there. And weirdly, it was kind of a bit of a circle moment to me because I played as a mini at their famous tournament, which was great. Their minis tournament, then they had to change the certificate to make it young woman and not young man. But I love that. And then actually my first game as captain against America, we played there. And the Folkestone girls played the curtain raise at the boys. It was like full circle. So I did personally, for like sentimental reasons, it was lovely playing there. But objectively, I'm like, why are we playing our home games at London Irish? And then we went and played at London Welsh, which was a slightly different experience, which I won't talk about now because I feel that Wales have got enough problems at the moment. All right. So it was just an odd time, and I felt like why are we making these decisions? We can play somewhere else. We should be playing at better and more appropriate stadiums. We should be going bigger and filling them, not thwarting ourselves. And I found that very frustrating, when I took over the captaincy, and even things like we'd be involved in privy to conversations about how much tickets were going to cost. And I'm like, that we need to make them a bit more expensive. Like we're devaluing ourselves, £5 a ticket. I'm like, come on, I'll pay more to go and watch level 4 men's or something. Do you know what I mean? I just kind of but I shouldn't have been, that shows, that demonstrates the game at that point, doesn't it? That the fact that I was aware of these conversations going around, we shouldn't really be thinking about that, So I was I was frustrated at the time with certain decisions that were made, and whilst you've got to pace yourself, I think there were times when England took a step back. And they definitely did in 2015 after they won the World Cup in 2014. That was a massive step back again. But, we got to a good place in 2025 internationally. So you kind of think, well, perhaps that was, as a bit of a sacrifice or whatever at that point. But I did find myself getting frustrated with some of the decisions that were made around some of the logistics at that time when I was playing. Absolutely.
What was the step back in your mind that you just mentioned?
What, in 2015?
Mm-hmm.
So England women won the World Cup 2014. A great time. It kind of, 2010 was nearly there, massive step up in terms of profile. Won the World Cup in 2014. Brilliant. We're going to carry on from here. We're going to spearhead on from here. We're lucky that we have Six Nations every year, unlike, we could carry on that momentum. You think like a sport like hockey, women's hockey, the Olympics, they get their 4 years profile and then it kind of disappears. It's like, well, we've got an opportunity, so that doesn't happen, in rugby. And then there was big kind of conflict between sevens and 15s and where bigger player resource was going, where the coaching resource was going. Streety left after 2014 or was asked to leave, which we won't go into now. And 2015 Six Nations, England women did very poorly. It had a very strange coaching setup, which shot them backwards several years. Actually, I remember I was at Twickenham for one of their games, and I sat there just feeling very embarrassed by the whole thing. And they've taken a number of high-performing players out to play sevens. They were trying to work out how sevens and 15s work together or whether they did. And I was slightly tearing my hair out at the time and thinking we've missed this massive opportunity, and then, obviously things have changed since then. And then they built again towards 2017 World Cup and then what became 2022. And then obviously 25 we know about. So, you know, brilliant. Maybe we did time it right. Maybe without those little setbacks, maybe the world wasn't ready for 80,000 at Twickenham before 2025. You can look back at it like that. But for me, the game was given a bit of a disservice at times. However, I think is in a good place now, and there's really good, strong leadership and a real collaborative approach across the RFU with the game at heart and not necessarily the men's game and the women's games, this add-on that we need to do. It's seen as a really, it brings a new audience to the game. It's a new marketing opportunity, which I feel that they've harnessed at international level. Club level still has a way to go.
Yeah, it's a great sponsorship opportunity as well for businesses. And taking you back, I mean, we've touched upon this. This is important because it'll lead on to 2015. So 2014, 2011, the game went pro.
Right.
We talked about professionalism before, but like what of the invisible structures of the culture that was in the amateur days withstood professionalism, and what actually started to fall apart when things got formalized?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I retired in 2011, so I was kind of came out of the system then. So, a lot of my contemporaries were kind of transferred over. So, Rocky would have been she was a bit like the Jason Leonard in more ways than one of the women's game, starting a very much amateur era, and then carrying on, to the first starts of the professional era. I think a lot of the culture probably did carry on, that kind of their focus on the 1% and also their focus on the when no one's watching. Everyone's still kind of spread geographically. And whilst they were on contracts, many of the players were still working as well or had part-time jobs. They weren't paid by clubs at that point. It was only a few players at the top internationally that were able to, take sabbaticals from work or go part-time. At that point, it definitely wasn't a long-term, full-time career choice. It wasn't, as stable as it is now. If it ever is, you never know when injury might come. So it was you know, it had gone a long way. I don't know. I wasn't one of those players that was in there that was getting paid. I would hazard a guess that actually there wasn't a huge mindset change because, as we said earlier, we considered ourselves to be professional many times.
Yeah.
I remember Sarah Hunter saying, well, just got more sleep when they went professional. And actually, apart from that, you know, same amounts of training, probably got more sleep and did a bit more video analysis.
Yeah. So I mean, so yeah, basically the systems held when the game went pro, and then you said it after 2014, the results start to deteriorate, and they got rid of the head coach as well. So something, I'm wondering if another sign that something perhaps was going amiss within the organisation or
Yeah,
in the structure.
yeah, possibly. I mean, I think it was time, like Gary Street and Graham Smith. You know, two of my best friends. I have huge respect for both of them, and they took the game from a platform that was created by Jeff Richards. He was instilling some more professionalism. He was a coach in 26, and then they, you know, and Graham was in there alone, and then with him and Streety, they took the game forward immeasurably. Put a huge amount of hours driving up and down the country. Did a huge amount of sessions with players. You know, worked with the EIS to get a really good sort of S&C platform. You know, they took the game on hugely. You know, but as in sport, it probably was right that, you know, that someone else took over, that probably the time was right. It was a bit of an odd way that it happened, and I don't necessarily think that they got the kind of the plaudits or the celebration or recognition that they should have done. Um, However, I think it was, I think it was probably a good thing that actually new coaches came in, and then, you know, I think Mitch is doing a great job now. You
Yeah.
know, and I think it's brilliant that he's come into the game actually. And I think, you know, it's kind of renewed his love of rugby, I think. But a coach of his caliber has done a lot, I think, for women's rugby. I think previously coaching in the women's game was maybe seen as a bit of a stepping stone to something else, which was sort of maybe difficult. Say, look, like this is high performance. This are women playing and competing at the top of their game, just like men are playing and competing at the top of their game. It shouldn't feel like a stepping stone. And actually, in some ways, maybe coaching in the women's game is more challenging. And we ask a lot more questions. um, and so, actually, I think Mitch coming in has been brilliant. You know, and I think it's good that he's sort of renewed, or said that he's renewed next to the next World Cup. Um, I think that's great. And you know, whilst you haven't actually asked me this, I'm going to chat about it anyway. I think it doesn't, you know, doesn't bother me women's coaches or men's coaches. I think it's the game, and it should be whoever's best for the job, quite
Yeah.
frankly. And you know, I've been coached by women, I've been coached by men, and I hope we don't get to the stage actually where we feel that in the women's game it should only be coached by women and only refereed by women. I've had a bit of an issue with that in previous World Cups where they've had so many female referees, and some pushed into that World Cup arena perhaps when they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
They should just be the best referees for the job.
Yeah.
You didn't
Yeah.
ask me about that. I just decided to
No,
get on my soapbox.
I agree with you. I could say more about it as well, what I think, but I don't think anyone will want to hear my views on it, you know, and perhaps I shouldn't say it, but going back a little bit again, you know, you say that everyone, like, nothing changed. So all the, like, the 4 a.m. sessions, or perhaps the invisible glue was still there, people putting in extra work. Could it have just simply been a case that we've been working so hard? We won the, 2014's happened, and once again, there's like a bit of burnout and there's turnover effectively. And that's what happened.
Possibly a little bit. There were a lot of players, as I said, that left the 15s game, went into sevens. There was a whole kind of a bit of a RFU trying to work out how that fitted together. Yeah, maybe. I mean, there weren't a huge amount of retirements after 2014, but yeah, it was more the sort of some of the players, you know, the whole raft of players going to sevens, you know, change of coaching, which I don't want to talk about too much now. Nikki Ponce became as head coach, was the weirdest, strangest decision ever. But we don't need to talk about that now. But yeah, and then, you know, and then they got, you know, new coach came in, Middleton came in as sort of head coach. He'd, obviously been involved in the setup before that. And then there was a new focus on the next World Cup. And, it's always going to go in a bit of cycles. Like you say, there would be a natural kind of drop off. We can't be all performing at that top level all the time. It's just fairly impossible, isn't it? As human beings, we can't cope with that. So I imagine there would be a bit of a drop off anyway. But it was it probably didn't need to be quite the drop off it was in 2015. But they came back from it, and ultimately it was all right.
So, Catherine, you've moved from elite sport into teaching. In a school, you can see systems under load every day, young people under pressure, adults trying to hold standards. What have you noticed about how leadership actually works in that environment, and that's challenged or changed, and what have you taken from rugby?
Yeah, interesting. So I left teaching at Christmas. So I went into teaching actually just after COVID. So I was running my business, and like many organisations, that got affected quite massively. I had my daughter, had a baby at the time, so I was like, maybe I will do a normal proper job. So I contacted my local school. Can I train to be a teacher? I'm like, well, yes, please. And then they offered me a job, and then I stayed there for 5.5 years. So I've only ever taught in one school. So it's maybe difficult for me to have a sort of a broad view on it. And I'm trying to be a bit diplomatic in how I answer this because I've only been in one school. I found it an interesting environment. I think because I'd come from outside in, I came into this very kind of quite insular, quite inward looking environment who probably not in all schools who are a bit scared of getting outside knowledge in. I think it's probably a broken system too. It's not a podcast about teaching, and I probably don't have enough knowledge about teaching to know it. But and you've got a rugby team or we're a high performing team. You see what your strengths are in that team, and you can actually shape the systems around that in a certain way. They don't have to be fixed, or like a very, very simple example is myself, I was sort of ball carrying 8. Well, you can shape your structure around that. They were talking about on pitch stuff. In teaching, it was like, well, the system didn't change, and we were having to fit all these different, whether it's students or whether it's teachers, having to fit all these different individuals into this one system. And for many students, that didn't work, trying to fit them into this one kind of class environment and really ultimately learn in the same way, although we talk about differentiation and whatever else it might be in teaching. And likewise with teachers a little bit. Because I got, they've got a really, really tough job. But, I taught nearly 500 kids. Some of them I saw once a week. And I was supposed to know everything about them. I might have had 32 kids in front of me, like on my own. And I've got to teach in a way that suits every single one of those students and know where their progress is and do all this sort of other stuff. It's a quite tough environment, really. And I think it's quite cluttered. I think, I think there are lots of lessons of sport that could go into education. I always a strong believer in sport that you do the basics really, really well, and everything else will come on top of that. And I felt like in teaching, everyone was trying to do that, but there was just no time. You couldn't do your job properly in teaching, I don't think, because of the system, which is quite a tough one, really. But yeah, so this is probably not a it's not a podcast to probably to address the challenges of the education system and teaching. I feel that there was probably more lessons from sport that could go into education than possibly the other way around. I think sport do a lot of things really well. I think we, recognise as, the different strengths in people, recognising, let's give a really simple example. When I've coached teams, just occasionally you might get someone who thrives on being told that they can't do something. And then they'll be, you're not many, and you have time to be able to recognise that. Most people thrive on telling them that they're quite good and they build confidence from that. But you have the time and the space allowed to be able to recognise that and how you can kind of motivate different individuals. And you don't really have the time or space to be able to do that in education, which is quite frustrating.
One follow up there. I mean, if you had the power, is there one thing that you would bring from sport that you would change within the system as a whole, not necessarily just the school that you've worked in? Is this something that practically you change tomorrow if you could?
Oh my goodness, that's the question, isn't it? I think there is this strong societally, we're told that everyone has to be good at maths and English, and you have to get your pass in maths and English, and you have 5 lessons a week of each of those subjects. And if you don't get your pass, you have to resit it, and you're a failure. Um, and I wouldn't pass GCSE maths now. I haven't used it since I left school, and that creates a huge amount of pressure for some students where actually they've got like phenomenal talents or strengths elsewhere. And our school system is just based around that. It really, ultimately, it's based around getting your maths GCSE and your English GCSE and then going on to study something else until you're 18, because obviously that's changed now. And I think for many of our students, it just doesn't work. And they
Mm.
end up leaving school feeling like they're a failure and because they didn't pass their English and maths, whereas actually they have got so many strengths, but our system doesn't allow to let that shine. And I
Mm.
found that really difficult. And then, I worked in a non-selective state school, but I would put more sport in. I'd put more PE in. I know that's my background, but there's so much research out there to suggest we need to be healthy, we need to be out there, we need to be doing more exercise, we need to be outside, and the time that they get is minimal, and we're doing a disservice to our kids. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be out there playing football or rugby or netball or hockey. They could be out there, walking or doing circuits or doing, like the latest gym craze, whatever it might be, without advertising anyone. Like there's so many different options, I think, and I taught philosophy and sociology, but below that, I taught religious studies. And really, for me, that was just teaching kids about different people's beliefs and different people's views. And I actually feel that that's in this day and age more important than anything. But I got my one lesson a week, so yeah, I would completely change it. I'd completely change the system. Stop this reliance on having to get your maths and English. It's still important. We need to we need to be able to read and write. We need to be able to, deal with figures and numbers, but not in the way we're doing it right now. We're doing a
Mm.
disservice to so many of our students and adding unnecessary pressure to them, I think.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
So I mean, it does lead on, actually. I was going to change my last question because we discussed a lot about invisible systems, but I want to talk. We spoke before we got on this call about, the likes of Harvard and McKinsey investing hundreds of millions into what business people can learn from sport, and particularly in the women's business world. I mean, what do you think from your lessons, an aspiring female business executive can take from your story, your journey?
I think I, th- I think men and women are different, and that's okay. Society's trying to say, men and women are different. Women have, I think, and some men, but many women have this, and I'm probably included. I am included. Have this frustrating trait of not going for things or not putting their hands up, and because they think, well, I can't do that, I can't do that. It's this well-known kind of like well-known thing is that there's passed around that say, if there's a job going and there's a list of 10 criteria, a woman won't apply for it unless she has all 10, whereas that's different for a man. And that's kind of like, and I think that's right. So I think more women have to make themselves feel uncomfortable by putting their hand up sometimes, like I did, put my hand up, so I want to be captain, making themselves be um, more visible. I think sometimes, the language that women use is not good. I ran a workshop years ago for, it was actually like female directors of sport in schools, and I had this workshop, and every time someone said, "I'm just this," or "I just do that," I'd put a bright pink post-it note on the table, and no one knew why I was doing it. At the end of this workshop, there were so many of these post-it notes on the table, and I said to them, "Do you know why I've done that?" And eventually they worked it out. And I said, "You are the people that the kids in your schools look up to, and this is the language that you're using. I'm only this, or I'm not very good at that, or I just do that." And I think all people, but I think women particularly, we have to be really objective. We have to take ourselves out of ourselves sometimes, look down on what we're saying and how we're acting, because not only does that have an impact on us individually, it has an impact on other people as well. And I think it's hard, isn't it? But we have to change this culture that it's sometimes, occasionally, you will get promoted or you'll get to the next level just by doing your job really well. But often it takes more than that. And it takes, building relationships or making yourself visible or having a reason to go and see the director about something, becoming a recognizable face. And I think it's a very female trait of, well, actually, if I just sit here and do my job, I'll get rewarded. And we have to be proactive about it. We have to, otherwise things don't happen. And it's not always easy. We say like at England Rugby, um, it's meant to be hard. Yeah, of course it's meant to be difficult. But there's no reason why we can't take that mindset and attitude into a business, business performance environment as well. Yeah, it's meant to be hard. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it. Everyone would be getting promoted. You kind of got to work for it. You've got to work at it, haven't you?
Do you think though that as well, part of that could be leadership changing as well, and actually recognizing people that don't come forward because they've got like hidden strengths and they're good. And sometimes, well, I often think that the person that puts her hand up often isn't the best person to do the role, and a good leader will recognize the people that are actually doing the work. And sometimes I think that needs to shift. I see a lot of that in my business.
You're absolutely right. The people that shout the loudest generally are not always the ones that should be leading. And the ability to recognize strength in others is such a valuable leadership trait, isn't it? And if you're not doing that as a leader of an organization, you're missing out, and your performance as an organization will suffer. And it's the ability, isn't it, to step back and scan the room. That's vitally important. I completely agree with you, but until such time happens, and if you're in an organisation where you haven't got a leader like that, then you're going to have to be the one to make yourself visible, in their tunnel vision, put yourself in their tunnel. But I think, recognising the strength in others is important and pushing those people forward. A strong leader will have people ahead of them. They'll be pushing people ahead of them. They don't need to always be at the front. And I think that's quite a powerful thing, utilising the strength of others. And if you go back to kind of rugby analogy and actually mentioning Rocky Clark, who you chatted to on your podcast, I remember there was a couple of games where at half time, we weren't quite there. And I'm like, you know what, my halftime chat is not going to cut it. A little bit more change. I was like, Rocky, can you do the halftime chat? And the words I would never repeat, but how she said it was absolutely spot on. And didn't necessarily make me a weak leader because I felt that I can do it at a time. It makes you a strong leader because you recognise when you need other people and what they can do. And in an ideal world, all organisations would be led by someone who could see the strength in others and could see those that are not shouting the loudest. And but perhaps with the clutter of daily life, with the pressure that some leaders are on in organisations, that's not always possible, isn't it? And I guess it's the ability of people to recognise whether they do need to make themselves a little bit more visible or not. And if they do, that's okay. Do it.
Yeah. And could you tell us what you're doing now, and the business that you're building up now?
Yeah. So prior to teaching, so in 2014, I was working for the RFU at the point, and I was going to lots of different rugby events, and I was listening to lots of speakers, male speakers and more male speakers, which are very, very good. Like, loved it. But I just sat there and like, women can do this as well. And so I set up a platform called Inspiring Women, and primarily a speaker agency. So I've got lots of different women from sort of mainly sport, adventure backgrounds, and they were going out into corporate schools, other organisations, telling their story. 2020, the COVID obviously happened, impacted it, and that kind of led to my decision to go into teaching. But I have left teaching. I, partly inspired by the Women's World Cup in the summer. I was like, there's still a need for this platform. I hope that before I get to retirement age, there's no need for a female specific platform for public speakers, because there'll be loads of women out there telling their story. But that's what I'm doing now. So Inspire Women, I'm relaunching the speaker agency, and offering sort of coaching for other women generally wanting to go into public speaking, whether already doing it or want to do it, from sports world or corporate world, and a few other little business ventures that all come under the Inspiring Women umbrella. But yeah, right now relaunching the speaker agency. So watch this space.
Yeah, we're watching. We're watching. So, but like, thank you for your time. We've got the quick fire questions, just like straight
I'm really gonna
answers. Yeah, just answer straight from the hoof. What's the worst part of being a captain that no one warns you about?
It can sometimes be a bit lonely. I think, I mean, I would always be captain. I love being captain, don't get me wrong, but you're kind of in this kind of like the middle zone. You've got, your coaches and whoever else, you've got the players here, and you're kind of in the middle. You're like a sort of filter upwards and a filter downwards. And sometimes you can share information you have, and sometimes you can't. So there are times, although you're seen as like you're put on a bit of a pedestal, sometimes it can be a little bit lonely. But the great stuff overrides that.
And a moment in a match where your body said stop, but something else kept you going. What was that something else?
Actually, there is a moment for me. It wasn't playing for England, it was playing for my club. So when I retired from England, I thought I'd just play some sociable rugby, and I moved back to Kent. And Folkestone Ladies weren't playing, which is my home club, but Aylesford had a team so near Maidstone. So I was like, I'll go and play there. Some of my players were there, some of my old mates from Folkestone were there. And then we got promoted, then we got promoted again, and then we got promoted into the Premiership, which is annoying because then I had to go back to the gym and stuff. And anyway, we were a village club essentially, and we had a great culture. We were kind of like playing against these giants, and there was us and our little village club. But we Aylesford started chatting to Harlequins, and Aylesford essentially became Harlequins, who then spearheaded this kind of big change in the women's Premiership. But we had to stay in the Premiership for that to happen. And we had a playoff game against Waterloo. We played at Broad Street in Coventry. And I kind of knew that if we didn't win that game, the thing with Harlequins wouldn't happen. It could have this massive ripple effect, and women's rugby could possibly not have gone in the direction that it did. And they had quite a fast winger, and it was near the end of the game. We were winning, and their winger had the ball, and she was shooting down the wing. And I was like, I have to tackle her. If I don't tackle her, if she scores a try, if they win, this is going to have a massive effect on women's rugby. So I don't know how I did it, but this was kind of driving me. And I caught her, and I tackled her. She didn't score. We won. Aylesford became Harlequins. All this stuff happened in women's rugby. I'd like to say that tackle led to 80,000 people in Twickenham. Probably didn't, but it makes me feel really good.
Yeah.
But there's little moments. That was definitely a moment where my mindset was like, I've got to do this. There's no option. I have to get this.
Yeah, it's
And
intent.
it kind of shows the power of mind, because I'm not that fast.
Yeah, it's intent. And as you say, the rest is history. The rest is history.
Yeah.
The teammate who made your job as captain easiest, and what did they actually do?
Probably in a way, Maggie Alfonsi. We were roomies, and I think the power of a roomie, or the right roomie, is quite hugely valuable thing. I think when you're in like a team setup, and you're spending time away from home, or you're in that kind of really kind of emotional bubble. Really, it's not normal real life. It's not normal real life. So when I was captain, I knew when I went back to our room, and there were certain things I could share with Maggie, certain things I didn't share with Maggie, as captain. But we could just unload on each other, and I could just sort of chat, or we could just do really stupid. I mean, one day we sat there drawing a picture of a table lamp. Neither of us could draw. We were absolutely atrociously bad. Or Maggie probably say she can, but it was just like, you could just completely just switch off from everything. So whilst I unloaded a little bit on her about captaincy stuff actually, and ultimate knew that it just wouldn't go anywhere else. So too she could unload a little bit from her kind of individual intensity to be the best player that she could be, and she was phenomenal. So I think she, and then probably Sophie Hemming, who's my training partner, they were huge. I don't think they realise it, but they were huge support to me as captain, really, because, you know, they both just got on with their job as what they needed to do. I never really needed to, they didn't really need to lean on me in any way, but they were just ever present in that whole time. And just Sophie made me keep training, wasn't a natural trainer. And Maggie was just that kind of release and relief I needed when I went back to the room, could just completely relax, and it was so valuable at the time.
Yeah. Sometimes I think, like when you go away on tour or you're playing away games and the rooming scenario, that's like an invisible system to bind people together. Even the roommates, you think, oh God, I've got a room with them. It just creates a bond.
It's huge, and I like now. I think, I don't like communal living. I've got to share a room with someone else, but I think it's really important. Like, if you get the get the right room. It's I did have to share a room once. I'm not going to say who it was. He, well, not Maggie. He snored a lot. I did not get any sleep before a Six Nations game. I was very angry. We went and won. It was okay, but I was like, I'm not showing that person ever again. It wasn't their fault.
It's got to be a
It was a
prop.
prop. Though,
It's always a prop.
It was a prop. Yeah.
And sorry about that. Yeah, well, we're both props or ex-props. Standard you held in the England camp that would seem bizarre to people on the outside?
Oh, goodness. I mean, we just kind of held so many standards. One of the things we used to do, actually, Jeff Richards implemented, and I still do this now individually. It's weird. If we got a plane, Six Nations, whatever, we always stayed in our seats until every single person got off the plane, and then we would go. And I do that now. I do it now. It was so ingrained into me at that time. I mean, probably logistically, it was probably easier, but it felt like we were showing respect. We were just being that kind of cohesive outfit. We were staying together, uh, get on the plane together, lead the plane together, that kind of thing. Win together, lose together. I don't know. It just felt really important at the time that we did that, and we always did that. And if anyone ever tried to stand up, we were like, "No, you got to wait." And that was kind of something that carried through. And yeah, I still do that now. If I'm on a train or we get to the station, I'll be like, "I'm not getting up yet," or a plane. I will just, unless I'm in a massive rush, I will always wait till the end. It's just something that's just been ingrained to me. So it felt really important in the time. Whether it had a jot of difference, I really don't know. But it was something that was something that mattered to us.
And drawing table lamps as well is another thing.
Probably should find them somewhere. I mean, Maggie's would probably sell quite a lot. Mine wouldn't. But
And the honest answer to what you miss most, the winning or the changing room before the winning in rugby?
Changing room without a doubt. That kind of, I mean, you guys know, like that feeling, like, it's silly to say on a podcast, and I can't really describe it. I can't really describe it. It's kind of the whole sort of the mix of emotion, the closeness to the people that you're going to go out on the pitch with. And you look around, everyone else's eyes, and, you might not be best friends off the pitch, but for that next 80 minutes you are, and you would do absolutely everything for that person. And you know that they would do absolutely everything for you. And that kind of, it's just such a high, that changing room moment. I absolutely love it. I pulled my boots back on at the grand old age of 46, and I've run out and played a couple of halves for Folkestone ladies, and I've absolutely loved it. And whilst the change room, they're a bit more relaxed and they've got like music and stuff, which I can't deal with. That kind of that pre-game kind of like feeling again, I just absolutely love it. So yeah, winning's good, but that get a dose of that moment and that belonging and that kind of the looking into each other's eyes again is brilliant. And I don't think you can replicate it anywhere else in life.
Do you think that it's possible to replicate that in business, even to a small degree?
I don't know, because I mean, on a rugby pitch, it kind of is the ultimate team sport. I know there's other sports will say this, but you kind of physically do have to put your body on the line for other people. And that's what takes it to a different place, I think, to to business. But you know, you can maybe like you're in a, you know, in a boardroom and you're kind of like you're sharing thoughts about a different project, or you've got a big, you know, got a big pitch coming up. And right, actually, if you do this right and you do that right, we could win this. You know, that's probably somewhere where you could kind of translate that kind of that feeling of that nerves as well, which is important. You need to have some. They're like your fuel, aren't they? But they're kind of that mixture of nerves and a bit of excitement. I think you probably can get that in some places. You know, if in business you're going for the biggest pitch of your life that could be life changing. You know, but you don't physically have to put your body on the line for someone else. And I think maybe that's where there's a sort of uniqueness about a rugby changing room.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what do you think, but you as well, Fitzy, of businesses and the concept of theming every week? So you've got a theme. Could that replicate it?
I think
But
it's
it's quite
certainly
hard to buy people into that, you know?
I think it certainly has its place,
Yeah.
and there's some crossovers, but I think the point that Catherine made is the most important one there, in terms of, you know, in business you're not going out and putting yourself on the line. That takes it to another level. Well, Catherine, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your time. What comes across isn't just a story about rugby. It's the picture of what actually holds a system together when there's nothing propping it up from the outside. It's been so insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you for joining us on The Business End.
Absolute pleasure and great
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you, Catherine.